In this video, I will analyze 8 principles in teaching speaking in an EFL class. A foreign language context is one where the target language is not the language of communication in the society. For example, learning English in Japan or studying French in Australia. Learning speaking skills is very challenging for students in foreign language context because they have very few opportunities to use the target language outside the classroom. Sometimes foreign language learners traveling in countries where their target languages are spoken find that they can neither understand native speakers nor be understood. There is an old story of the college freshman who struggled with introductory French and then with intermediate French. When he finally passed that course, his parents were so proud. They sent him on a trip to Paris. When he got to Paris, he discovered that no one there speaks or understands intermediate French. A second language context is one where the target language is a language of communication in the society, such as English in the UK or Spanish in Mexico. Second language learners include refugees, international students, and immigrants. Some second language learners, especially those who arrive in their new country as children, achieve notable speaking skills, but many others progress to a certain proficiency level and then go no further. Their speech seems not developing at a point where it still contains noticeable patterned errors. These can be errors in grammar, vocabulary, pronunciation, or any combination of problems that affect the learner's ability to communicate by speaking. As you know, speaking is a productive skill, and typically speaking is taught after listening or reading. With the new textbooks in lower secondary school, speaking is integrated with reading. I must say that all the principles are important in our teaching process, but of course, basing on your real context of teaching, we put different degree of significance on each principle. I will take examples to illustrate the way that we can follow the principles in our job. Now, it is time for us to look at each principle. We will analyze them very slowly. The first principle is to provide students with comprehensible input. The word comprehensible means understandable. Input here means something to talk about. The phrase comprehensible input signifies that students understand all or at least almost ideas that they are going to say about. In addition, with L2 learners, they have to know how to express their ideas, how to use grammar or vocabulary items to express those ideas. So, the job of a teacher is to first provide ideas for students and then have them with words, phrases that they want to use in the target language. For example, if a teacher wants his or her students to talk about ways to protect the environment, he or she has to provide students with understandable ideas, grammar, and vocabulary. Only by doing this can students perform their speaking tasks. The second principle is to make use of students' background knowledge. As you know, background knowledge is very helpful, as when students have knowledge or experiences, they will have ideas to talk about. For example, if you ask students in some mountainous areas about the forest, they can have a lot of ideas or things to share. But with students who live in cities, things may become more difficult. You may notice that some topics in the new textbooks are hard for your students, especially about space or classical music. Yes, this is true to me as well, simply because we do not have much background knowledge about those topics. So, what should teachers do to exploit students' background? Well, before teaching, you can use a picture or some questions to ask the students. Make sure that the picture and questions can arouse their interest, or at least they can refer back to what they know. Remember that we often use clues or our background knowledge to guess something new. Now, let's move to the third principle. The third principle is to have students interact with their peers. Interact here means that students must work together in pairs or in groups. This principle, I think, is easy to understand. Students cannot speak individually, and teachers can always ask students to deliver speeches in class. They have to work with others instead. Teachers should be aware that group work and pair work can be effective when students are willing to work together. As a teacher, from the very beginning of the semester, you have to know the English proficiency of the class in general and each student in particular. What is more, teachers have to assure that each group or pair contains a talkative person who can facilitate the others. But make sure that the student does not cover the work of the whole group. Research has repeatedly demonstrated that teachers do approximately 50 to 80% of the talking in classrooms. It is important for us as language teachers to be aware of how much we are talking in class, so we don't take up all the time the students could be talking. Pair work and group work activities can be used to increase the amount of time that learners get to speak in the target language during lessons. One further interesting point is that when the teacher is removed from the conversation, the learners take on diverse speaking roles that are normally filled by the teacher, such as posing questions or offering clarification. The next principle is to set the seating in the classroom. Make sure that the students can move easily. Don't just force them to sit in the same place from lessons to lessons. Sometimes it is okay to change the seating of the class. They can make noise, but remember that it is good noise. The fifth principle is to plan speaking activities that have students make themselves understood. We know that when students speak, they must focus on accuracy, and this means that they have to choose the right vocabulary, apply grammar rules, pronounce words carefully, and so on. In the classroom, there are information gap activities such as jigsaw readings or listenings, group story building. Next, the principle number 6. Please remember that when students speak to others outside the classroom, they usually do for interpersonal or transactional purposes. Interactional speech is communicating with someone for social purposes. It includes both establishing and maintaining social relationships. Transactional speech involves communicating to get something done, including the exchange of goods and services. Most spoken interactions can be placed on a continuum from relatively predictable to relatively unpredictable. It's from Newman. Conversations are relatively unpredictable and can range over many topics, with the participants taking turns and commenting freely. In contrast, Newman states that transactional encounters of a fairly restricted kind will usually contain highly predictable patterns. And he gives the example of telephoning for a taxi. According to Newman, interactional speech is much more fluid and unpredictable than transactional speech. Speaking activities inside the classroom need to embody both interactional and transactional purposes, since language learners will have to speak the target language in both transactional and interactional settings. For Principle 7, personalization is a process of making activities match learners' or circumstances, interests, and goals. Personalizing an exercise can be as simple as using students' names, academic majors, cities, and so on. Personalizing language lessons is partly a matter of careful planning and partly of responding creatively to students' questions and comments during activities. The last one is very simple. Don't be too ambitious. Set and communicate attainable goals for learners and provide students with appropriate and consistent feedback on their progress in attaining these goals. Remember that each lesson has its goals, and you should try to have different activities aiming at a particular goal. For example, if students of grade 6 can speak correctly some simple sentences about their school, you are successful. Let's continue the lesson.